welcome to MS4, and today we're going to be talking about the very sexy topic of shortage. Yes, so we're coming to you today in completely unnatural lighting. It's raining here in LA today, so there's your weather forecast from the West Coast. So if you hear any dribblings and droppings, that's exterior, it's raining. So anyway, I have my cup of coffee, getting ready for work already. But I wanted to take this time to talk about shortage. One of my lovely viewers had recommended this as an interesting topic, and I thought it actually was. And I had some things I could say about it, and so here we are. Cheers. Coffee. Okay, so today, shortage. I think that there's a couple of categories to break this down into, and they'll kind of flow together. But we want to talk about actual shortage, and then perceived shortage, local shortage, and then intentional shortage is what we want to talk about. So I want to start first off with the idea of actual shortage. And when I was working for Chanel, one of the things that I discovered is they actually had a gardenia fragrance. And I found this fascinating because I'd never heard of it. And they told me that the reason that it is more rare and harder to find is that the growing cycle for what they needed to make the fragrance was about 3 years. So the production schedule for that was a lot longer than some of the other fragrances that they had more easily accessible flowers for. So I started looking into that. Now, Chanel has a garden of flowers. It's about 5 acres in France. That they use specifically for about 5 different varieties of the flowers that they use. For some of the fragrances, they use the tuberose, and they don't want to use the Indian tuberose because it has a slightly different flavor, if you will, a fragrance. So they have their own gardens, but they also have third parties that provide some of the flowers for it. The garden that they have is very well specifically tended. The amount of water, the soil, everything's organic in that one. And they try and make sure that the third parties that they work with are held to the same standards of raising the flowers for the fragrances. The rule there is that they want to make sure that they're holding themselves and the people they work with a higher standard. But I did want to point out with some of the new perfume companies, the perfume houses that have come out that are very big on sustainability and organic and all those things, they do end up holding some of the higher houses that care to be so, I guess I should put that in this way, to a higher standard, because as one of the perfumers had mentioned it, with the luxury houses, they need to have some perception of being held to a higher standard than just the ground floor, the lesser, I'm going to put it that way, sorts of fragrance houses and brands. And so I think that there is something to be said for some of the smaller houses holding themselves to certain standards, because instead of the trickle-down theory, in this case it's the trickle-up theory, that these smaller houses are holding some of the larger houses to keep those high standards. So with the availability of different flowers, the growing cycle and so forth, it creates a little bit of shortage in certain ways for certain types of fragrances. And also this applies to different elements in cosmetics and fragrance also. One of the things that we saw through the pandemic was the idea of coconut, a little bit of a shortage of that. I first realized that in my small coffee houses because they weren't able to get a hold of the coconut cream for coffee if you wanted something. They were fine with almond, they were fine with oat, but coconut was an issue. And places like Starbucks, because they were larger, had more of a steady shipment supply. So if there was a shortage of actual coconuts, they were going to be the first people to get it. Now this, if you look at the fragrance houses again, the reason to want to be in control of your growing of your items is so the idea to prevent that shortage. And I'll link this an article for the Chanel Perfumier, that the idea of future proofing, the idea that you are in control of the elements, and so therefore you're better able to withstand the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune by being in control of those elements that are necessary for your fragrance. They also, it's an idea of being in control of the means of production also, that you have your own manufacturers and places like that. Chanel has, and this is quite the element of contention. Some Chanel fragrances are made in France, and some of them are made in New Jersey for the US. And people will complain that they're different fragrances, that they don't seem to be the same. Now Chanel won't comment on this, and I would say probably, if I'm guessing, we know that there's different regulations for import-export, different amounts, and probably, most probably, the actual recipe is the same. So if you ask somebody from the Chanel company, is this the same fragrance that we're manufacturing? The answer is going to have to be, in many ways, yes, because it's the same recipe. Now, it will change depending on what the types of elements of your fragrance that you're producing, where you're resourcing those from. Do they have the elements of that brought into the US and then manufactured in New Jersey? And does it make a difference? And there's a lot of people that will say, yes, it makes a difference. And then other people will say, no, it smells the same. I don't disregard a certain love list, because I know Chanel will say that all of their fragrances should smell the same on everyone. But I know that that's not true. Body chemistry makes a huge, huge difference. And they have primers now that you can put on before your fragrance to try and keep most of the skin reactive chemistry from going on. But I know that if you have quality ingredients, that does make a difference in keeping the fragrance more the same across different skin pH levels. But I do know it makes a huge difference. I can recognize number 5 on anyone, but it does have different qualities depending on the wearer and what other elements that they're wearing. But going back to shortage, sorry for the tangent, the idea being that if the elements are the same, if the recipe is the same, then you have the difference of where are they sourcing elements for, how are those things cared for, what is the difference in soil and weather, what is the difference between things that are not able to be brought into different countries. And in order to keep there from being shortage, if there's any problem in any of the elements, the growing elements, the flowers that happen, say you got blight in one country that just ruined all of the certain types of crops, then you would have a shortage in that country. And if you have other manufacturing outlets in other places and other links to the elements, the growing things, you could still have the other places not have shortage. So the idea being that the larger your business is, the more critical it is for you to have multiple manufacturing locations in different countries, and also different connections to supply of the elements, and also the idea of owning the means of production being important to keep your product from going into shortage. We saw also during the pandemic that certain places that manufacture cosmetics for a number of brands, some of them shut down, and we saw them kind of, have a shortage in what was being made. And then also some of the smaller brands, because they were less powerful, had less money, had less options, had to wait while some of the brands with more money got their products produced and out. And then, if there was a shortage of labor, then those houses that are smaller, we're not able to get things manufactured as quickly because of the labor shortage. So people don't think often about the elements in a supply chain with shortage that can affect that. If you have a shortage of people who drive truck, that do long haul cross country, you can have local shortages because things don't get places, because you have a shortage of people who travel the different products from place to place. So if you have a shortage at any point in there, in production, in the elements that are used for an ingredient, the means of production, the manufacturing locations, if you have a personnel shortage, if you have a worker shortage, if you have a shortage in the people who are part of that supply chain bringing things, if you have a shortage in, say, if things go by train or by boat, there can be shortage. And so that's all about the things getting from place to place. You can also find now there's not actually a shortage of things, what we call a perceived shortage or a local shortage, meaning sometimes we have supplies coming in from different countries that will be held at ports for who knows how long, which can cause a shortage of certain things as well. So you have the product exists in the world, but you're not able to get it because there's a local shortage or a perceived shortage. We are not getting it, so we perceive that there's a shortage. Technically, it exists, we just don't have it. So that's kind of more of a perceived shortage on things. And then we kind of get to the point where there's the idea of an intentional shortage, and we are very familiar with that in the element of this is an item that you're only going to be able to get for a while, or it's a limited edition, or we're only doing a run of 500. And that kind of intentional shortage that we're getting the FOMO for because only 500 people get to have this. So that's an intentional shortage that we're familiar with because that plays on our idea of this is special. This is something that not everybody is going to get to be able to have because of the shortage, and that in some ways that raises the importance or, social greatness if you have that and nobody else has that. So that's an intentional shortage, but I want to talk a little bit about it's an unintentional shortage, and I'll talk about that in a second. Needing to get my coffee in me while it's still moderately warm. So we know about the intentional shortage because of limited edition, but I think that we start losing the idea of intentional when we're thinking about, say, brands that hinge all on one specific ingredient, and that's their bread and butter. Let's take argan oil, like the Josie Maran. All the products in that line are using this product. And when you start out and you found a new element, it would behoove you to do research and to see how sustainable that element is. And if you have the ability to grow more, produce more, take a hold of the means of production and the means of producing the elements of it. Because at a certain point in time, if there's only a limited supply of that item, it's going to depend on how fast you can get into place, means to grow more of that, and how long the growth cycle takes for that. Many of the new breeds of things have come about because they're trying to shorten the time that it takes to grow something, or they're looking at ways to, can we do this hydroponically? Can we do this? Does it make a difference to it if we grow it in a different way, in a different setting, with different scientific things? Or do we need to buy more land and use that and be in control of that type of situation? And is that possible where it grows? Does it make a difference if we're taking something that's naturally occurring in a certain place and we move it? Does it have the same properties? And I think about brands like, say, Kopari, which is all about the coconut. Um, we have so many new products utilizing coconut. And I know for those people who are allergic to coconut, they're very sad about this. But it's becoming where coconut is this, it's good to drink in your coffee. It's good to have in your face products. It's great to have in your hair products. But the idea being where do we find coconuts? How fast do they mature and grow? What does this mean ecologically? Are they the same if they're grown? Like, can you grow a coconut in captivity? That's always the question of how does this work and how does it function as far as economically in a certain location for the people there. So if there becomes a problem growing this and it's more of a shortage, this is going to have to either make great waves in the production of coconut on the element side. Where do we grow it? How much do we grow? In what way do we grow it? Are there alternative ways to grow this? Or is this something that as the item becomes more in shortage, the price rises, and then if products are going to be using that element, real coconut, not fake coconut, what are they going to be doing as far as the price goes? Like, technically, if this is less available, they have the means to raise the price on it, and is that sustainable for the people who are buying it? Will people buy the same product at a much higher price point because the elements of it have now become more rare and harder to get to, and thus more expensive? So that's sometimes when you'll see some brands bringing out new products with different elements to it, when before they've always been, say, a coconut based, and suddenly it's like, okay, if we're doing the coconut base, either this has to raise or we have to diversify into other things. Let's try some aloe, let's try some some other humectant, something other that smells good, to try and bridge that gap of the things in our line that are going to be more expensive because of the shortage of the elements. And some things they can solve that way. They can figure out how to produce more. And other things, not so much. And so you find the rise of a lot of synthetics in fragrances. It's one of those things that synthetics have gotten better over time, but there's still kind of an issue. I found that when I was working, I would work at Chanel on the counter, and even the fragrances I didn't love, I never had an allergic reaction to. Even if they were what I would consider stinky. But I would go and work some in the not so fine fragrances. You have fine fragrances and then fragrances. And I would just I'd be sneezing, and my nose would be running, and my eyes would be all bloodshot. And it's because the synthetics worked differently on me than natural fragrances. That you can have allergic reactions to certain things in real fragrances if you have an allergy to that plant, but mine was, I was reacting to the synthetics. Something in the synthetics was really bothering me, and it's not that I didn't want to work in the other fragrances, but I had a physiologically negative reaction to the synthetics. So it does make a difference when they try and solve problems in shortage and in price by going the synthetic route. And I think that it's both, that's helpful to bring fragrances that people will like to a larger audience at a lower price point, but it does bring up those elements of, we're not using those actual elements, those actual flowers, and it can make a difference. The problem with that, with the shortage of things, because some of the ways that they're trying to get away from that are problematic, can be problematic, because I may not be allergic to a coconut, but I can be allergic to a synthetic coconut fragrance. And so it's very interesting to me from a perspective looking at fragrance. I think that the modern fragrance buyers are much more savvy. For instance, oud. No one in the regular market probably had heard of oud, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And now you go on any fragrance channel and like there's fragrances with this in it. What is it? And it's one of those things that having the savvy marketplace means that there's more transparency into the things they're going into. So brands can also market different things to a more savvy consumer, and they can also experiment with different elements. Things that, say, if they do have a shortage this year because of blight somewhere, they can go, okay, we're launching a new fragrance that has these elements. And so it's no longer, it's something we can all enjoy. It's still at a low enough price point that people will buy it. But it's preserving that sort of small quantity, the shortage of what we have for this other fragrance. We can move over, and it's seamless to the public. It doesn't look like we are, changing for shortage, but we are. So anyway, I thought that this was just interesting. The idea of future-proofing, the idea that people are looking to say, okay, what's the possibilities of things happening for the future, and how can we keep them from disrupting what we're wanting to do? And part of that is trying to be in control of the elements, being in control of the means of production, then having some sort of ability to regulate the shipping, the logistics of things, trying to regulate shortages in labor, shortages in transportation, and then trying to find ways around importing and exporting issues by having different manufacturing locations in different countries, and what a difference that makes as far as the product itself. And then just the idea of the intentional shortage, like we have placed so much emphasis on one particular element of this, that we're going to be causing our own shortage, which is intentional, unintentional. They don't mean to be, moving themselves into a box where they can't anymore because of shortage do what their brand is known for to be doing. And then the intentional shortage of the FOMO of the limited edition. So anyway, I just found this really fascinating, especially from a perfume perspective, but for all sorts of other cosmetics and fragrances. That's one of the reasons that I think that a lot of the cosmetics, one of the reasons that they're trying to innovate to bring us new and impressive elements for skincare, for hair care, for fragrance, is because in trying to develop those new things, they become more in control of an item that no one has, that just they have, or something that's more sustainable or more able to be produced in the future. And that element of future proofing, it's like we're not going to run out of this element 2 years down the line and have to throw up our hands and go, okay, we can't do it anymore. Or we can reformulate, we can re-innovate, or innovate rather than re-innovate. Sounds like I'm talking about zombies. But anyway, so I think that that's really fascinating about how it creates the need for this future proofing, this need for evolving both in how we do something and what we do it with, what are our elements. And it just creates a whole interesting thing to think about if you're trying to future-proof your product for cosmetics. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I just think it's fascinating. Before we go, what's on my face? My eyes playing with the Nomad Hudson Valley palette collection there, trying not to have FOMO for the new Nomad palette before I can figure out whether I want it or not. The rest of my face is all Summer Fridays. I have the skin tint. My favorite sunscreen is the Summer Fridays sunscreen. Love this. And then I got off the website. This is not available at Sephora, but it's the Summer Fridays. It's a cheek and lip color. This is in Heat Wave. I wish they would get these at Sephora. There's 3 of them right now. But these are they have a light kind of a sweet scent, not like it's more like a candy scent, but it's not fakey candy, which makes no sense. But anyway, so I'm trying these out, and so far so good. It's got a little more emollients than I usually like, but you can get it a fairly decent read. It feels pretty good on my lips, so the lips are okay. But anyway, playing with this from Summer Fridays. I think that's it. I think it just stopped raining also, so I guess I'm ready for my day. I hope everyone is doing well and that you are not experiencing shortage in your life. But if so, remember you can always innovate. So anyway, hope you're doing well, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.